Well, right now I am in the city of Munich, and this is a city that is just teeming with history. And if you're like me and you are kind of drawn to the history of World War II, well, the history is just all over the place here. This is the birthplace of National Socialism or Nazism. And this spot where I am standing right now, I guess you could say, is kind of where it all began. This is the site of a beer hall that no longer exists. It's now like a plaza, an office space, and apartments. But this is where a place called the Brau Keller would have existed. And it's right here in November of 1923 that really the first shots that started the avalanche that would be World War II was started in something that has become known as the beer hall Putsch. As I mentioned, the site where we are currently standing is where a beer hall called the Brau Keller would have stood in 1923. In Germany in the 1920s, beer halls were not only a place of social gatherings, but also political ones. So people would come to these places and give big speeches. And on November 8th of 1923, Hitler and the National Socialists, or the Nazis, were going to seize an opportunity to try and take over the government. The state commissioner by the name of Gustav von Kahr was giving a speech here, and Hitler storms in and he interrupts the speech with a pistol shot that is fired into the ceiling and announces that the revolution has begun, and that there were about 600 armed men that were now controlling the hall and that no one could leave. So Hitler and the Nazis got Kahr and two other leaders that were also there to try and back the revolution. They kind of placated them for a time, and this kind of went on overnight. General Ludendorff, who was a hero of World War I, was also here to try and give legitimacy to it. But anyway, the whole thing ended up going south, and the next day on November 9th, Hitler and about 2,000 to 3,000 Nazis ended up having a march into the center of the city to try and take over the government and meet with other elements in the city. Now, just because the Brau Keller is no longer here doesn't mean that we don't have at least some evidence or markers that remind us of what was once here. If you look here on the plaza, they have a memorial to a man by the name of Georg Elser. Now, in Germany, there was a resistance movement. Not everybody followed Hitler or agreed with what he was doing. And every year, Hitler and the Nazis would come back to the Brau Keller, and Hitler would give a big speech. You'd have all the high-ranking Nazis here in this place. And Georg Elser decided that he was going to try and assassinate Hitler here. So in November of 1939, he worked to create a bomb that was set to go off on a timer. Hitler typically spoke like 2 to 3 hours. He was supposed to speak, I think, from 8 to 11 that evening in November of 39. So the war had already started and been going on for a couple of months. And Elser placed the bomb kind of behind the podium next to a pillar. Well, that evening Hitler had to rush off a little early and left 13 minutes before the bomb went off. So that not only would have taken out Hitler, but also Himmler and Goering and Goebbels and a bunch of other high-ranking Nazis. Now, there were some people who were killed in the blast and several dozen who were injured. As a matter of fact, the last stop today, we're going to be going to where the funeral of those who were killed was held. As for Elser, well, he was captured at the Swiss border, really within yards of the fence, and he was first taken to Sachsenhausen concentration camp, which is near Berlin, and then was later transferred to Dachau concentration camp. We're actually going to be visiting that later on this trip, and he was killed there in April of 1945. But man, it is crazy to think about how this man almost single-handedly put an end to World War II while it was still in its infancy.
En la tradicional manifestación en la cervecería de Munich, WWII, se cometió un cobarde atentado. El FIRA había abandonado el local poco antes de ocurrir la catástrofe. El sitio en que Adolf Hitler estuvo pronunciando su discurso quedó cubierto después del atentado con un montón de escombros de 3 metros de alto.
The only other thing they have here that gives evidence that the Burgerbrau Keller existed was another thing talking about Georg Elser. Again, here's a picture of the Burgerbrau Keller. There's Hitler speaking, and the bomb would have been just right here along this pillar. Here's a picture of Elser, and then this is the damage that the bomb did. And again, here's another picture of Elser. So here in Munich, Elser rightfully is viewed as a hero, even though the assassination attempt was unsuccessful. And it's something that would cost him his life. Now, by about mid-morning on the 9th, things with Putsch had really started to fall apart. Ludendorff had allowed von Kahr and the other 2 government officials to leave. The police were now being mobilized to put down this revolution or this overthrow. So Adolf Hitler decided that he was going to lead a march through the city to try and get to the war ministry to link up with other elements of the revolution and to also try and gain support of the people as he was going, trying to basically recreate the Black Shirt March or the March on Rome that Mussolini had done. So anyway, today what we're going to do is follow the route of this march all the way to where it ends. Hitler and the Nazis would do this every year in the years following whenever he took power. Let me be clear on something though. This is not a memorial march. We're not celebrating this. What we're doing is just kind of showing the history of that. I have to put in that disclaimer for people who just don't get such things. But anyway, today we're going to follow the exact same path of those that participated in the beer hall putsch. So right up here at the top of the hill is where we just were at the former location of the Burgerbrau Keller. And around noon, well, Hitler and his followers would have made it right about to this point, and they would have turned left and would have started making their way into the city. And as they were approaching these 2 bridges up here, the first one being the Ludwig Bridge that crosses the Isar River, well, they would have been met by about 30 policemen who were armed and ready to try and stop this massive group of Nazis who were marching towards the war ministry. Goering, who was also a World War I veteran and had been a well-known pilot, made an appeal to them to, I'm about ready to get hit, made an appeal to them to not fire, and that caused them to stall long enough to where they could be overrun. And as you can see, we got quite a bit of construction going on, so we can't see the bridge as nicely as what we would maybe like, but yeah, this is where that group would have crossed. We just crossed over the first of 2 bridges over the Isar River here, and there's an island in the middle of the river, and on this island, well, you have the Deutsche Museum. This museum was heavily damaged due to Allied bombing during World War II, and if you look up here, well, you can see this eagle statue that at one point would have had the Nazi swastika underneath it. But anyway, After crossing the bridge behind us and then this bridge right here in front of us, Hans Frank, who was going to go on to become the Governor General of Poland, was staged up here with a machine gun to guard the bridge, and Hitler and the rest of the men would have continued on towards the city center. Here's a bit of history that people may not know. As Hitler and his band of Nazis were making their way along this route, well, staging a revolution can make you hungry. So they actually stopped right here to get themselves a little bit of a pastry. Actually, that's not true. But I didn't have breakfast and I'm hungry, so I'm actually going to stop and get myself something. Alright, well, we just got ourselves set up with this apple-looking thing that looks pretty tasty. And the next spot that we're going to, where several, I guess, well-known photos were taken, is at a place called the Isar Gate. Alright, gotta say, that apple thing that I just had was pretty dang good. What's not good is the fact that I got these people parking their dang vans right here at the Isar Gate. So this is one of 4 medieval entrances into the city of Munich, and on November the 9th, well, Hitler and the Nazis would have passed right through this area as they entered onto Tal Street. There are a few famous photos that show Hitler, like with, I think Julius Streicher is in there, and also Hermann Goering coming through this area right here. But yeah, as they were walking towards the war ministry, they would have passed through that gate and advanced right down this road. Now, this is the Isar Gate, or the Isar Tor. We've moved a little bit further down the street, and this building right here in the 1920s would have served as the location of the Sterneckerbräu. Now, if you watched the last episode, we already talked about this place. This is where the Nazis had their home office, and where Hitler was recruited into the Nazi party. But on these beer hall Putsch marches, well, they would walk by this building every time, and I guess kind of remember back to the early days of Hitler joining the Nazi party. All right, we're going to go ahead and move on now. We already talked about the assassination attempt that was made on Hitler's life in November of 1939 by Georg Elser. But there was another assassination attempt exactly 1 year before in this very spot. As I mentioned earlier, when Hitler was in power, they would reenact this beer hall Putsch walk every year. So in 1938, on November 9th, Hitler and his party would have been coming from this direction right here. And standing approximately in the spot where I am standing was a Swiss theology student by the name of Maurice Bavard. And he was going to shoot Adolf Hitler as he passed in front of him. Well, as Hitler is making his way right through here in this area, Maurice Bavard was preparing himself, and just at the point where he was going to pull out his firearm and shoot Hitler, well, the crowd erupted and they started doing the Nazi salutes, and they started waving flags and obscured his view, and Hitler passed by without being shot. Now, Maurice Bavard was later captured whenever the plot was uncovered, and he was sent to Berlin, where he was beheaded by guillotine in 1941. But yeah, that assassination attempt happened right here. Okay, well, I've now moved into the Marienplatz, where Hitler and the crowd of National Socialists would have moved into. And once they got here, there was a huge clot of people that were here in the square. And it would have been a pretty rambunctious scene. So after passing through the square, they would have hit what's called Wine Street, or I think it's Weinstrasse, right here behind me, and started heading north. And it's at this point that things are going to go really south for this group of revolutionaries. The spot that we've moved to now is called Max Joseph Platz, and this is an area that would have inspired a couple of paintings by Adolf Hitler. As a matter of fact, right there at the National Theater is where he would have attended operas later on during his time in power. But on November 9th, 1923, he would have led his group of National Socialist revolutionaries through this square as they were making their way to the War Ministry. And they were going to be encountering some problems once they got to that spot right there on Residenzstrasse. Okay, so we are walking along Residenzstrasse now, along the same route as Hitler and the others who were trying to overthrow the government. And if you'll notice, the street is not very wide. So you have like 2,000 to 3,000 Nazis who are moving into this area. Well, they're going to get bottlenecked right here, and it's going to rob you of your superiority in numbers. And as they were making their way down this street, right down here in this square were about 100 policemen waiting for them. All right, well, all of a sudden, we got ourselves a little rain situation that has developed here. But we're going to try and push through it. So you can only imagine what this must have looked like, where you've got 2,000 to 3,000 Nazis under the leadership of Hitler that got right up to this point. And as I mentioned, just ahead would have had about 100 policemen blocking off this square to head off this revolution. Now, we don't know exactly who fired the first shot, but there was a shot that was fired, and then about a 1-minute gunfight that ensued. And with that, the revolution was put down, and Hitler, I think, dislocated his arm in the process. But this site right here, in the years to come, would end up becoming like a Nazi memorial or a Nazi shrine. Now, as I mentioned, during the Third Reich era, this would have been like a huge Nazi shrine. As a matter of fact, if we would have been walking through here in the 1930s, we would have seen a couple of SS honor guards standing here. And up above, there would have been like the Nazi eagle and a big monument or another shrine type thing with the names of the men who were killed in the beer hall Putsch. And anyone who would have walked by here would have been required to give the Nazi salute in honor of the men who died in that Putsch. But if you didn't want to do that, if you wanted to resist, well, there was an alternate route over here that you could have taken. One other quick thing, if we take a look here on the side of this monument, you can see where one of those plaques used to hang. Of course, that was taken down after the war. But what I really wanted to show was down here at a place called the Viscardigasse. So let's say, for the sake of argument, that you're a German citizen and you don't support the Nazis and you don't support their ideology, which there were plenty, and you don't want to give the salute whenever you walk past this spot. Well, you might dodge down this alley right here. As a matter of fact, this place is nicknamed Dodger's Alley. And if we move up here, you can see that there's a path of golden colored bricks that have been laid here to kind of remember and commemorate the people who, in a way, showed their resistance to the Nazi ideology and the Nazi movement. Yeah, very cool. All right, well, there you go. That was just a little bit on the beer hall Putsch route here in Munich. And of course, this spot right here in the later years would have been the site of a lot of ceremonies and rallies and things like that. There are a lot of pictures that you can find of events that happened right here in this very spot. But anyway, have a lot of other places that we're going to be looking at on this visit. So we're going to shut this thing down and head off to the next place.